Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 74.
Every student is different, and your child will have their own strengths that will determine the best route to where they want to go. They'll have interests that will determine the goal, and strengths and weaknesses that will determine how you get there.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Welcome, Stephen Horwich, back on with us. He's the author and creator of Connect the Thoughts curriculum company, which we've discussed in the past. He's been on our podcast. This is what number? Is this 4? It's been on our podcast 4 times. This is just picking up our discussion from last time of how to homeschool. This is going to be our fruits of, why we homeschool. Mm-hmm. So do you want to just get started?
Sure. I think it would be a good thing to start the discussion with why educate a child in the first place.
And we had discussed before we started recording that homeschoolers compare themselves a lot to the traditional public school, and mostly because that's what most of us know. So we do that comparison. But really, there is no comparison, and we discussed how that's kind of... And we shouldn't even be going in that realm. Exactly.
No, public education has its own set of goals, and those goals currently are illustrated in Common Core and the kind of testing they're doing. Their goals are heavy on math and science, as George W. indicated he wanted education to go, and at the expense of every other subject. Now, that had already been trending that way in public education for decades prior to George W. making that announcement, but now that's very intensively the pursuit, and we see it in Common Core and things like that. So I think it's very important as homeschoolers or as educators, which is how we should see ourselves, to determine what is the purpose of education. Why educate a child in the first place? It's very time-consuming. It's expensive. Years of our lives go into it. There have to be very compelling reasons for us to want to educate a child and do all the things that are necessary to successfully do that. So I want to discuss that first. I think when you're establishing goals for education, we have a habit as a culture of not asking the people who are affected by education what their goals are. The person who is most affected by education is the person receiving the education. And a child, regardless of their age, they do have goals. They do have things that they want to do and things they'd like to accomplish. And as they get older, they have, careers that they might be eyeing and all kinds of functions that they'd like to try. We don't ask them as a rule. Public education, of course, can't ask individual children what they want to do with their lives. They don't have time, they don't have the resources, and they can't shape a child's education individually around his goals and purposes. As homeschoolers, we are perfectly free, and it's one of the great strengths of homeschooling to shape the educational priorities around what the student wants to do and what the student wants to learn. If we can pinpoint those things, we can provide the student opportunities to experience the very areas they're most interested in, which will excite the student about his own education. He's far more likely to make a commitment to it. He's far more likely to dive in with both feet because he'll be doing something he's interested in and wants to do. And at that point, education, instead of being the drudgery that I think a lot of kids think it is, particularly in public schools, becomes a joy and a stepping stone towards their own objectives in life. So I think it's very important that we start with that definition. The first person whose goals we should be concerned with are the student's goals. After that, there are 3 other sets of goals that can intrude into the process. One of those is the state. The state has its own agenda as far as education goes. It's not a very productive agenda, and it's not very effective, but they have an agenda. And in a lot of states, when you homeschool, you do have to meet with master teachers once a month and show them what you're doing and indicate that you're covering what the state requires in their usually very limited agenda. But as you said, Rebecca, and rightfully so, we shouldn't be comparing ourselves as homeschoolers to public or even private school education. We have a different set of standards and an entirely different set of goals that should be mostly student-centric. If that's so, we're doing something that no school can really do well, and right away, comparisons become apple and oranges, and we're wasting our time. The third set of goals that kind of enter into all this is the family goals. Mom and dad and grandma and grandpa have their own goals for Junior, and they have their own ideas of what they think Junior is good at and what he might want to do. And I'm not at all suggesting that you shouldn't take those goals seriously, because mom and dad are going to be working hard to educate their child and they want to have a stake in that. I am suggesting, though, that mom and dad's goals are secondary to the student's goals, that you should be willing to allow your student, as he gets a little bit older and knows his own mind, to take the reins and tell you what he wants to study. And if it fits in with your own ideas of what that student is good at, that's great. But if it doesn't, really it's mom and dad that have to yield, not the student, because that education is not for mom and dad. That education is for the student.
And I think that's one of the most difficult challenges. I really would like to talk about that sometime, of kind of changing your mindset as a parent.
I think one of the most interesting things about homeschooling is that there are very few people involved in the education of that child, so there are very few minds that have to be changed. If the parent is homeschooling with the idea, if their big goal is that my child is going to do well in life, my child is going to live a happy, productive life, doing things that he or she believe in and are good at, if that's the goal, the big goal, then the little goals don't matter very much. Like, and I also think he should be good at math, or I also think he should know biology, or I also think whatever subject should be focused on. Those become expendable to the bigger goal, which the parent should have. My child is going to live a happy and productive life and be happy with what they're doing with it. If that's your goal, it's easy to change your mind.
Yeah.
If your goal is smaller than that, if it isn't as embracive of your child's life as that, then you will have a harder time changing your mind. I had a hard time changing my mind when my children didn't really care about history at various points in their studies, or my children didn't really care about something that I care about in their studies. It was hard to look at them and go, no, son, you are going to study history. And since you don't like it, you're going to study it 2 hours a day instead of 1. And you can't do that. You have to let it go, because your kid is looking you in the face and telling you what he does want to study. And you should be thrilled as a parent to discover that thing, and you should encourage it. Yeah. So I think we can change our minds if we bear in mind the big picture, the big goal of what we want for our child. And it shouldn't be based around a subject or an activity. It should be based around a happy and productive life, and whatever that means for that particular child.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and some of the problems that we may have in homeschooling are more parenting issues, I guess, than because because I'm yielding that control, like we talked about. But anyway, to go on with what you were discussing.
No, listen, Rebecca, that's dead right. I know for myself, in my own experience, I had taught in schools for decades before I started homeschooling, and it was very, very hard to let go of all of the requirements of education that I had cataloged in my mind. If you're an educator, these are the things a kid must learn.
Yeah.
And none of them generally matter to the child, nor do they have an impact on the child's life, which is, in the end, what matters. So anyway, there is a fourth set of goals, a final set of goals. And those are goals that impinge on the the child's life through groups that he may belong to, like a church or a temple or social groups or friends or whatever. Those can also be shoved down the student's throat as mandatory required goals if you are going to be acceptable to us, the group. And in the end, I think a parent, in part, and this is going to sound funny to, I think, some of the parents out there, I think you have to protect your child from that, because a child will easily succumb to peer pressure. Very likely may end up doing things and studying subjects that they don't have a true interest in, and you'll be able to see that in their work and in their approach to their work. If they're not really enthusiastic, if they're not thrilled with what they're learning, if the information isn't useful to them instead of somebody else, you'll see it in their demeanor. And I think as a parent, as a homeschooling parent, you want to have your antenna up for that kind of peer pressure and make sure that it doesn't really impact what your student is required to study.
Yeah, exactly. I would second that.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough because your child most likely belongs to the same church you belong to. Your child may very well have the same family friends that you have, because where else would the child have gotten them if you're homeschooling? You still must protect your child from that. Of all of these 4 sets of goals, the only one in the end that matters is the child's goals. He's going to live with his education. He's going to carry it into his adult years, and he's going to use it. And if we don't satisfy his requirements, his desires, we're really not educating in any kind of a productive sense.
No, I mean, you're essentially doing what we're trying to avoid, is filling the head with just useless facts and stuff that they won't use. So
yeah, and that takes us back, Rebecca, to what you were talking about, comparing ourselves to school. Well, that's what public schools do. What you just described is exactly their methodology. Get the kid to memorize facts and spit them back out in a test.
Yeah, very competitive.
And this is why so many students are opting out of testing, and even teacher unions are starting to scream about it, of all people. Yeah. They're starting to scream about mandatory testing for the same reasons, in part, though teachers have their pay attached to how the student performs in those tests, and that's really why they're screaming. But anyway, I think we start there, Rebecca. We start with, how do we define education? Who is it for? What are we trying to accomplish? And I think if you look at what we just discussed, it provides you an agenda based on the idea that you can actually talk to your student and get from him or her what their own objectives for life are, and then start to shape their education around that, which tells you what subjects you need to make sure they have available, perhaps what sort of experiences you need to help create for them, places to go, people to meet, that will help them do the things that they're already interested in.
Well, and did you struggle having multiple children? You definitely want to fit their education around what that child wants to do, but when you have a huge number of children.
Yeah, when I was homeschooling, I had 10 children in my house for years. My 2 kids plus 8 other kids from 3 other families. And every one of them had their own agendas. We had one young lady who wanted to be a basketball player, and then later on decided she wanted to be an actor. And we had one guy who wanted to be a writer. They all had their agendas and different levels of ability and interest. No, I didn't find it particularly difficult. I just kept creating experiences and curriculum for each child that allowed them to move a step every week in the direction they were interested in. We also did require a certain amount of history and science and creative writing and stuff like that as a base curriculum. But when a student stopped being interested in one of those subjects, we didn't push it down their throat anymore. So if a student did a year of science or 2 years of science and they said, I really want to be an actor and science isn't helping me with that, I would discuss with them the fact that science can help you with your acting. If you're going to do a lot of movies today are science fiction, and if you want to understand the basis behind those stories, you will need to know some science. But if they really didn't want to proceed with science, we gave up on that and found out what the kid was interested in and let that child help us shape his education.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing about schooling in a group, what I was thinking is like making sure they have kind of field trip activities that kind of center around what they want to do. But when you're working in a small group like that, I think if everyone's aware of everybody else's goals too, they would appreciate going on a field trip and maybe learning more about, what Sally wants to do, even though, is that something that you guys did or?
Yeah, we did. We took field trips. What we tried to do was kind of focus them around what a number of students were studying since we had 10 students in the house. So if we had a number of students who were interested in oceanography or ocean life or whatever, we'd go to SeaWorld or go to the Pacific Aquarium and bring everybody with us. And interestingly enough, what generally happens when you do something like that is that particular child or several children who are interested in the subject and the other students catch the bug.
Yeah.
They get interested in the subject because they're there and it's interesting to look at. And there's always going to be one or two kids in a group that don't care and do not get interested and aren't going to get interested. And, they can survive that because it's a day. And the next day we'll do something that's specifically oriented for them.
Yeah.
I think once you establish a student's goals and you're shaping their education, you have to still be able to change your mind. We're still on that subject, and we probably will be on that subject through the entire discussion you and I are going to have today, because the student's going to change his mind. He's going to work on a subject that interests him, and then at some point he may very well look at you and say, I was interested in that, but I'm not interested anymore, and I want to do something else now with my time. So you may get all excited about your student being excited about a subject and discover 3 months, 6 months, a year up the road that he's no longer interested in that subject, which again requires the parent to be willing to change their mind and drop small goals in favor of large goals. I think it's very important to keep our eye on the ball as far as that kind of thing goes.
Yeah.
Now, you and I were going to discuss college, and I kind of want to work my way up to that.
Okay.
I think that as a homeschool parent, you're looking for whatever the end game of your student is. And that can start very early in their education. I've talked to 5 and 6-year-olds who told me what they wanted to do with their lives, and 10 years later, they were very much moving in those directions. And I know for myself, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. I distinctly recall what I was interested in at that time, and it's pretty much what I've spent my entire life doing. So we shouldn't ever assume that a child is too young to know his own mind. That isn't so. And we shouldn't ever assume that a mind can't change, because that isn't so. A child could be absolutely determined at the age of 6 to be a lifetime gambler and, change their mind by the time they're 9. And having been beat up on the street 7 times by people they owe money to, decide that going into dance professionally. So I think as much as the child can change his mind, the parent is going to have to do the same thing. And that includes higher education. I know that my generation and the generation before I'm 58 years old. My parents and their parents, to them, college was the goal of education, which is funny because college is just another place where more schooling occurs. It isn't any kind of a goal. It really very much depends on what you want to do with your life and where you want to take it as to whether or not college is going to be of value to you, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think establishing college as your child's goal for your child when your kid is 7 years old or 10 years old is not a very good idea, because it may not have much to do with college, what your child is ultimately going to be interested in doing with their life. College is required for certain professions like law, or if you're going to be a doctor or an engineer or a nuclear physicist. There are certain professions where you really must go to college and get a degree if you're going to practice. But there are many, 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 many professions that colleges have really no right entering into teaching, because they don't have any ability to teach in those areas, the humanities and the arts. They're not very good at these things. I'm going to discuss.
Even in medicine, sorry to break in here, but I have a 16-year-old son who's interested in paramedics at this moment. And so we are like, well, is that going to be your end goal? Because if he's interested in paramedics, you can do that at a cheap technical school.
A trade school.
But right. I'm like, but if down the road you think that you might want to move into being a doctor or some sort of nurse or a physician assistant or something, it would be wise to do the paramedics at a college because, you can apply those credits. So even within medicine, you can do something different. If you have a child that maybe is interested in building things, but maybe not going as far as an engineer, I mean, you can get a little bit of extra training.
Well, Rebecca, what I would say about that is two things. One, you can learn how to do anything, and you certainly don't need to go to a college to learn it. I'm a big fan of internships. I'm a big fan of taking a child who's interested or a student who's interested in something and putting them in a room with somebody who has great expertise in that area and having them work with that person for a year, and they can fetch their coffee and clean their shoes and learn everything they can in the process. I think that's a very, very healthy approach to learning a trade and smarter than going to school. On the other hand, the other side to the discussion is that to be accepted as an engineer or a doctor or whatever, you do need a degree.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to get much work. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, too, and I will share one with you right now. When I was 21, I was running a theater company, and I used to, among other things, I would write and design all of our marketing and promotion. And a friend of mine who did some artwork was working for a large advertising firm in Los Angeles. He asked me if I was interested in writing PR for a living. I said, absolutely not. And he said, well, would you please come and talk to my employer and see if you can change your mind? So I met with this man who owned a rather large advertising firm in LA. And he asked me if I'd be willing to show him what I could do and do an assignment. And I did it very quickly in about an hour and handed it to him. And he was very surprised to see me still in his office because he assumed I would go home and do the assignment over the next 2 weeks. He read what I did. He liked it. He started laughing as he was reading it. And he excused himself from the office, went out to the pool where there were 6 writers, big room where there were 6 writers working. And he fired them all on the spot.
Oh, my gosh.
Then he came back into the room. He sat down with me, looked across the desk, and he said, would you like to be the senior copywriter for my firm? Well, the interesting thing about that story, and I did do that job for about a year, and then I grew very, very sick of it and ended it. But the interesting thing about that job was that you are supposed to have a degree in journalism to get that job. That's the minimum requirement. And, of course, I didn't spend a single day in college, never. The only day I ever spent in college was teaching in college. I used to teach at USC, and I taught music theory in another but not as a student, never as a student. Over the years, I found myself in positions where, having no degree, I was doing things that you were only supposed to do if you had a degree, like teaching at USC in the professional writers program. So, I don't know. I start to wonder after a while if you couldn't do almost anything and not get a degree. But there is this social level of acceptance for a degree in certain areas. I don't know if I would take my kid to a doctor who did not have some kind of real training as a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, but like I said, you definitely have to focus how far the kid wants to go and necessarily what their goals are in order to discuss it. Before we go on, let us take a minute and hear about our sponsors. Homeschooling but need help covering all the important subjects? Want to make sure you're thoroughly covering science, history, civics, trying to get arts and language skills into your student homeschooling? How about creative writing? The answer is Connect the Thoughts, a proven secular curriculum for ages 5 through high school. For over 10 years, Connect the Thoughts has improved educational results for over 20,000 homeschoolers. Hundreds of parents, student success stories tell the tale. Connect the Thoughts, the best homeschooling curriculum available. Use the link at theluminousmind.net podcast show notes page and download free samples today. Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Stephen Horwich, a homeschooling advocate, on the benefits of homeschooling. I think a lot of times in the arts, I don't know if that can even be something that's learned in a way. I mean, I think there's definitely, you can shadow somebody and pick up their skills, but I have a degree in interior design and worked in that kind of the art field. I did not have an eye for it. I'm much better at the organizing, getting the products there versus creating.
That's a big subject. Let's talk about it because that's my area of expertise. I'm a writer. I'm a director. I teach actors, writers, and directors and composers. I'm a songwriter. This is what I do. I would say that anybody can be improved in any area of the arts. I would say that everybody has a level of creativity available to them. I've never met a human being who could not create something, and that creation could be improved with knowledge and experience and some guidance. But I also think that a writer is not so much born, but that the essential drive to write and some of the ability to write, you are born with that.
Yeah.
Now, I can take somebody who hasn't written and doesn't have much experience in the area. If they're driven, I can make them into a decent writer, maybe a good writer if they really work. Same thing with singers and actors and directors. I've worked with all of these as an educator and as an artist.
But spending $100,000 on an art degree.
But see, that's a different discussion. You're talking about sending somebody to college to learn art. And I would tell you that if you do not want your child to end up as an artist, send him to college. The people teaching in universities and colleges, as a rule, there are exceptions, but not very many, those people were failures in the area they're teaching. They're failed actors or failed writers or failed painters or whatever. And all they have to offer your student is what didn't work because they don't know what does work. They didn't make it. That's why they fell back into being an educator. Now, there's nothing wrong with being an educator if it's your principal goal, if it's your calling. But if you fall back on it because you failed at something else, and you don't have anywhere else to go, and if that's the area you failed in is the area you're educating in, this is not somebody you want to turn your child over to learn art because they don't have anything to offer your child. And what's more, in their heart of hearts, they don't believe that a person can be successful in that area since they were not. So I really, really frown upon students going to colleges for acting, writing, directing, painting, dancing, design, any of the art areas. If you're going to do that, go to a specialized school. If you must go, for instance, if you're an animator and you really want to be an animator and you really want to go to school, then you should go to Cal Arts. Cal Arts is in California. It was started by Disney. It's funded by Disney, and they pull animators out of that program and hire them professionally. So at least you would be in a place where the teachers work in the industry because that's required at Cal Arts, that to teach there, you must have worked in the last year doing the thing you're teaching professionally.
Well, it seems like they're shorter terms, too. They're not full bachelor's degrees or something like that.
It's 2 years.
Yeah.
And also at Cal Arts, they used to have this thing where you show them your artwork, your drawing, and every student accepted is given a certain amount of money towards their education. They don't have to pay their entire tuition. If you're accepted to Cal Arts, they cover a large part of your tuition because they want you there. They liked your creative work. So I think Cal Arts has a very different viewpoint of how to work with artists than certainly almost any college or university, and even most trade schools. They have a very rational view of what they're trying to accomplish and who they should be supporting. I kind of liked what I saw there when I kind of walked around 6 years ago. I liked what I saw.
And really study those colleges out. I mean, find that stuff out, Mm-hmm. So I think that's one thing parents are failing to parent their children on their higher knowledge, or really help them or, really ask those questions to the kids to make sure they're going to get the type of education that's going to help them be successful. So,
and again, that should be developed around what the student wants to do.
Exactly.
It's not about what the parent wants. It's about what the student wants to do. If you have a 16-year-old who looks you in the face, and you and I talked about this, really schooling should end at around age 16. Most kids are ready, over-ready, done.
Oh, yeah, they are.
They do not want to continue with education beyond that point unless they really feel that it's taking them where they want to go in life. So if you have a 16-year-old who looks at you and he says, I don't want to do math, science, history, writing. I don't want to do these things anymore. What I want to do is learn how to build an automobile engine. As mom and dad, you should start seriously investigating with your child's assistance where to take that student for him to grow in that area. Do you intern him with a mechanic at the local gas station? Is there a trade school where they teach that and they have a very good track record of turning out really well-trained people who can really build an automobile engine? Whatever it is that student has set up as a goal, your goal at that moment becomes find the way, find the road, open the doors, find a path that your student can walk, things they can do that will resolve in them being precisely where they want to be in their lives, doing what they want to do.
Well, like you said, when they're happier doing the thing they want to do, they'll just really flourish. That really does become a driving force for them, and they come really excited about it. So,
I don't know any parent who hasn't seen their kid unhappy about what they're having to study. I've never seen a parent who didn't go through that. I've never met a student who didn't go through periods of displeasure and unhappiness being forced to study things they didn't like. So as parents, we've all seen it. We all know what you're talking about. We've all seen Junior going, I hate school, I hate what I'm studying, I hate everything, I hate my life. And, conversely, we've all seen our kids or most of us have seen our kids at some point when the key got turned and they were thrilled with something they were doing, anything. And suddenly that became a goal for them and something they really wanted. We all know as parents, we all look at our kids and we know the difference between when they're happy and when they're unhappy, and when they're productive and doing well and when they're not productive and doing well. Obviously, we prefer them happy and productive and doing well. That should be a huge goal in a child's education.
To go back to the parents, many times, we're like, well, this is what it's like to be an adult. You're just not happy because we've been forced into this idea of like, well, you have to have a mortgage, you have to do this, in order to be a successful person. And there's a lot of people that are very unhappy with the way their lives are going. And I think it's really hard to get yourself out of that mindset to realize that you can follow your passion and still be a successful person.
Yeah, that's very valuable, Rebecca. That's absolutely true. Again, we're back to peer pressure and what it can do. Mom and dad have peer pressure on them.
Yeah.
We have been trained to believe all the things you just said. You must have a house. You must have a mortgage. You must have car payments. You must have a job. You're not supposed to like your job. You're just supposed to do your job. All that kind of garbage. And I have to tell you that in my experience, the most productive, creative, happy people that I know, they don't generally work for other people. They almost always work for themselves. They are almost always in a creative field, or at least something they perceive as being a creative field, where they're creating something that they're happy to create. And very often they don't care very much about the rent, the mortgage. They don't have any money in the bank. Those things might concern them from time to time, but it isn't where their attention lies. Their attention is on producing and creating wonderful things every day. And if those things pay the bills, so be it. And of course, we all want that. But I would so much rather have my children be happy than rich. And if they can be rich and happy, I'm happy. That's great. But happy is the key to the equation, not rich, not house, not mortgage, not car. These aren't the keys to a human being's happiness. Happiness is the key. Doing what you believe in and want to do with your life is the key to happiness. Then you get up in the morning knowing that you're going to be doing stuff you love to do, rather than getting up in the morning and go, oh, I have to make so much money today. I have to do this at the job that I hate. I have to keep my boss happy. And What does that have to do with life? These are things that are enforced on us by the culture we live in. And once again, it is the parent's job to protect the child from that kind of peer pressure.
And your child may, if he wants to be an auto mechanic and you feel like that's not a worthy profession, a parent's perceived thing, and you're like, well, if he wouldn't have been homeschooled, he wouldn't have desired to be a mechanic. But that's not true. He may have ended up gone through public school and ended up being a mechanic. And we just need to really focus on that's really his passion.
I understand parents establishing their own mind goals for their children that the parent believes in. Of course, I get it. It's very clear to me why a parent would do that. We love our children, we're proud of them, and we think we know best what road that child might walk in order to be, quote unquote, successful at life. But I think what we need to change our mind about, and we're back to changing the parent's mind, because I think that's the key to successful education.
Yeah.
What we have to change our mind about, what is the definition of success? Success is not the mortgage and the car payment and the debts and the taxes and the rest of it. That's not success. It is playing a certain game, and there are people who truly believe that that's the way you succeed. And for them, that kind of success is happiness, and it is right for them. But for many, 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 many people, that is not a road that ends in happiness. It's a road that ends in a lifelong frustration. I've known way too many people who were stuck in dead-end jobs that were not creative, they did not like, that they were required to do to support their families, and on and on.
And then they hit 40 and they have a midlife crisis.
If they make it to 40 and they don't have a heart attack in their 30s,
exactly,
forced to do things they hate every day.
Exactly. Well, we should go back to our positive discussion.
Right. So looking at college, you're preparing your kid for whatever's going to happen at the end of his education, whether it be he'll go to work in an internship and learn more about something he's interested in, or he'll go to a technical school, or he'll train privately on his own in a subject he wants to work in, or he'll work professionally in the area he's interested in, as my son did at the age of 16, because he was already working as a professional actor at that point. Whatever that student's goal is, that's what you're aiming for. And if college is a required component of his goal, of course you have to aim for that. If being a writer is your kid's goal, or being an actor is your kid's goal, or being a singer is your kid's goal, for heaven's sake, don't send them to college. You're wasting money and time. And there's a compelling reason in the time thing not to send your kid to college. The reality is, an actor who goes to college spends 4 years there, say. In those 4 years, now he comes out of college, he's 23 years old, 24 years old, and he looks around thinking he's going to be competitive in the industry because he has a degree from whatever university. The jobs he might have had a chance for are now being taken by actors who started younger than he did and established themselves. They are the actors who will get the jobs, and he will be on the outside looking in. I've known an amazing number of actors that this describes who've had a very tough time getting into the field because they wasted 4 years in college. Besides the fact that college isn't a good place to learn anything about acting, the time gets lost. The time element has an impact on a potential career.
And then the debt on top of that. I mean, sometimes when you're starting at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to rake up $50,000, $100,000 in debt and stick that on your kid's shoulders and say, there, begin your life, that's really not a good thing. But beyond that, there are children who have to go to college to do what they want to do, absolutely, in some specific professions. You really want to look at your individual student and his goals, not your goals for him, not your friend's goals for him, not your mom's goals for him. His goals, the student's goals, and determine with the student's cooperation and participation what the correct or best pathway would be for that student. There are students who need a lot of discipline and structure to learn. A student like that who wants to learn writing really may need to be in a workshop for writers that's very intensive, really may need to work in an internship where somebody's looking over their shoulder every 5 minutes, making sure that they're doing something as a writer. Or if the student is more self-directed and self-motivated, like I was as a writer, if you leave me alone when I was 14, leave me alone for 3 days and I'll write a play. So, I think every student is different. And your student, your child will have their own strengths that will determine the best route to where they want to go. They'll have interests that will determine the goal, and strengths and weaknesses that will determine how you get there. And you as a parent have to assess those things intelligently with the participation of your student and decide, how am I going to get my kid there? What's the best way for him or for her? Not just what society says the only way is, because there's never just one way in the door. There's always 10 ways in the door, and you're looking for the best way for your student.
Well, and helping your student network, I think, is a really powerful thing. I've talked to several different people, and we've kind of discussed that. Many homeschoolers, that's one of the advantages that they have, is that they're able to get out in the world and actually start networking with professionals at a much younger age. I mean, they come out of school and they're in this place where your peers are all your same age with people that can do nothing for you. You enter college, with peers all your same age with people that can do nothing for you. But those kids
that's right. That's absolutely right.
The kids that are out in the world, they start networking early.
The young actors and writers and directors that I've known in my business, they all started when they were 7 years old, 10 years old. By 16, you're old, to get started. You can do it, but it's getting up there to get started. And I live in Los Angeles, the world capital of film and television. It's a good place to be if you're an actor or a writer or a director, because you can get out and start acting professionally at age 5. You can have a reputation by age 12. You could have contacts a mile long by the time you're 15 and have a career. So, and I've known many people that absolutely was the route for them.
Well, you don't necessarily have to live, if you want to go that route, just start connecting with, if it's an arts thing, go to the theater and really stay afterwards and, really start networking with people. On how to do what you need to do.
And meet people on the internet who are professionals that you know about, or have mom and dad, that whole 6 degrees of separation thing. Have mom and dad ask their friends to ask their friends who they know. Yeah, you're absolutely right about the other thing, too. You go to college and you're surrounded by kids who don't have any contacts, who don't have any more knowledge of the area than you do, and you're also surrounded by teachers who didn't succeed in that field. I don't know who you're going to learn from or how you're going to find your way in, surrounded by either, a lack of information or incompetence. How do you get there using that as your tool? It's different, in the area of science or math or some of the other areas in colleges where sometimes the teacher has great expertise in law and medicine. Sometimes the teacher is a practicing professional. But, your best bet for most professions is to meet people who are already working in that profession, learn from them, intern with them, study with them, get to know them, pick their brains, find out how they got in, what they felt was important to learn it, work hard, care about what you're doing. This is usually the best route in.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then as far as homeschooled students going to college, really focus on what the testing, the college entrance exams, and
unfortunately, to get in, you will have to do the testing. And there are some colleges that are so eager to have homeschoolers in, like American College or University that I was talking about the last time we spoke. They offer free courses in how to pass the tests because they want homeschoolers. But every college is now looking for homeschoolers, or almost every college. They really want them because homeschoolers score higher in academics and are frankly better, quote unquote, socialized than public and private schoolers. And you need to keep very good transcripts. You need to have very good records of school attendance and the subjects that were studied by the student and sample tests that were done and all that kind of stuff. But you're going to have to take the standardized tests to get into college, you will, for a period of time, maybe a couple of months, 3 months, have to focus on those tests and studying for them so that your student can score well in them. Those tests are so utterly useless, it's mind-boggling to me that we use them as any kind of criteria for who's intelligent enough to go to college. I don't understand where that idea came from. Unfortunately, it is a part of the system. Your students will have to focus on that. There are books usually available for $20 or so that have all of the, how to practice for this particular test and all the information in it. And that's what my son did when he wanted to finish high school. He studied for the GED for 2 months, and then he passed in his first attempt, and that was it.
Is the GED really required anymore, though? Or I'm just seeing so many students that are able to just kind of bypass that whole thing and just head right to college?
It depends on the state you live in. In some states, you must have a high school diploma in order to do the college tests. You have to have it in your hand in order to take the tests. So we're in California. He just wanted to end off on high school. He did not want to go to college at that time. So he was only interested in finishing his quote-unquote high school years when he was 16. So he took the test. He passed the GED, which legally allows him to no longer be required in school or receiving an education every day. That's the purpose of the GED.
Oh, okay. All right. Just your state standard then. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the same standard applies to many states. A kid is required to be in school till he's 18. It's the national standard. And the only way out of it is for him to get a high school diploma early. And the way you can do that is through the GED.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other suggestions that I've received is that, especially if you're a writer, if you want to go into web design or anything like that, especially if you want to get a job or to get a scholarship of whatever school you want to go to, is to actually have like work samples. If you're a writer, start a blog. If you're a web designer, ask a friend if you can start their, their business website or something.
Absolutely. Real experience counts. It matters in almost every profession. If you can demonstrate expertise in a profession at whatever age, people are far more likely to take you seriously. It's absolutely the case. I won an Emmy Award as a writer and director when I was 17 years old.
Holy cow.
For a piece that I wrote and directed that was aired on a local TV station. And because I won that award, I had demonstrated significant expertise as a writer and a director at a very early age. After that, people in the industry took me fairly seriously. So having samples of your work is very important. If you're going into animation or art, you should have a portfolio. It should be full of your best work, and you should be ready to show it at the drop of a hat. If you're a singer, you should have a repertoire of 8 to 10 songs, all different styles, ballads and upbeats. You should be ready to sing at the moment's notice. The charts should be in your key. You should be ready to perform. If you're an actor, you should have monologues and scenes ready that demonstrate you at your very best, and you should be ready to cold read and audition at the drop of a hat. These are the requirements for a young person trying to get into a business. You must do the hard work and be able to demonstrate expertise. This is true in every field. It is particularly true in the arts. But the beautiful thing about it is that you will be creating things you want to create if that's the area you go into, an area you love, and you will already be making art or creating in the field you love and being able to show others that you can. That allows you at a very young age to get started doing the thing you most love and want to do, and that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, and just one of the other things that I think should be your goal as a homeschooler, to go back to kind of our goals of why we homeschool, is to be a self-directed learner. And by the time they're ready to go to college, they're able to put together portfolios and learn how to do websites and all of that pretty much on their own.
Rebecca, we know so many kids who go to college without any direction. They're waiting to be told what direction to go in. They don't even know what to major in. They don't know what they're interested in. And they go to college thinking that they're going to discover there what they're interested in.
That's scary.
It is scary because college doesn't work that way. So. It is imperative that you determine as a parent and as a student the student's interests. You must do it. It is your biggest job as an educator. Find out what the student really wants to do, and then, of course, work towards the student taking on his own education. You want self-motivated, capable students who can learn whatever they need to learn.
Yeah.
It's imperative in terms of survival in life that you be able to learn what you want to learn.
There's a lot of universities offering free classes. My middle son's turning 13 right now, and he's talked about being an engineer. And I'm like, well, before we really invest that money, let's really discover if this is what you want to do. So, MIT has some free engineering classes that he can take, that he can start out on. So that's what we're going to spend next year really doing is I'm going to have him pick one or two of those, and we're going to work through those to see if that's really something. All kinds of colleges are figuring that out of let's offer free courses, really search for those free courses to see if that's something your child wants to do before you invest the money.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it falls under the same heading as an internship. Your son is going to experience from professionals who have great expertise the area that he's interested in, and he will decide after 6 months if he's still interested, or he will refine his interests, narrow them so that he knows what part of that field he wants to go into. And I think that's great.
It's a fun world we live in right now with all the technology and the capabilities of those things at our hands.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So definitely do not feel like, that was one thing I heard over and over and over, that my kids wouldn't go to college or they wouldn't, be successful with homeschooling. But because of those resources, I almost feel sorry for kids that are hampered by the classroom because, they have the world at their fingertips and really use those resources to...
Historically, the majority of successful people in history were self-educated. The list of people, and I have it in my book, the list of people who are self-educated is mind-boggling. Almost anybody you admire in history was self-educated. So, won't go to college, won't be successful. History tells us 1,000 times that that's utter nonsense. Ray Bradbury, who died a while ago, is a great writer, said that he received his education in the public library. And he is far from the only really famous writer to say that. It's very common amongst writers. They will tell you that they learned how to write in the library by reading, that school was not where they learned their trade. So, if the child is self-motivated and knows what he wants to do, and you create opportunities, and in his case, the library was the opportunity he required. If you create the opportunities for your child to experience that area, as you are doing with MIT, that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. So do you have any more to discuss on this?
No.
Okay.
Rebecca, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Stephen Horwich, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Also, be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list so you can receive notifications for our weekly audio blog, The Spark. We would love to have you join our program. Do so by going to the scheduling tab and become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website, theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Google+. Get our audio content on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.